August 19, 1944. Wehrmacht headquarters. East Prussia Generalleber's Alfred Jodl studied the latest intelligence. From the collapsing Western Front, his staff had done the calculations. Allied supply lines now stretched more than 400 miles from the Normandy beaches. To General George Patton's spearheading Third Army, the Americans have outrun their logistics. Jodl concluded, Patton will halt within days, perhaps hours. No army can sustain such speed without fuel. The logic was sound by every measure of German experience. An armored division advancing consumed 150,000 gallons of fuel daily. Patton was hundreds of miles from his depots. The mathematics of movement left only one outcome. The Third Army would grind to a halt, giving the Wehrmacht precious time to regroup along the Seine and hold until winter. What Jodl did not know was that 125 miles away, 5,958 trucks were already rolling eastward in an unbroken stream, headlights blazing in defiance of every rule of military doctrine. They carried 12,500 tons of fuel, food, and ammunition every 24 hours. This was the Red Ball Express logistics operation so audacious that German military science had never conceived it possible. Within 72 hours, Patton's immobilized tanks would smash through German positions at the Seine. Within a week, Paris would be liberated. Within a month, the Americans would be at Germany's border. The Wehrmacht's finest minds were about to learn a new law of modern warfare, written not in theory but in motion, delivered by 23,000 truck drivers, 3/4 of them African American, who turned French highways into the most efficient supply line in military history. The Wehrmacht had pioneered blitzkrieg, revolutionized combined arms warfare, and knew intimately the tyranny of supply lines. Again and again, their victories had been broken not by enemy resistance but by logistics. In Russia, the German advance had stalled not because of Soviet armies in 1941, but because the Wehrmacht simply could not keep its troops supplied across such vast distances. German trucks rattled apart on endless Russian roads. Horse-drawn wagons, still 80% of German military transport, could not match the speed of panzer spearheads. Railway gauge differences meant supplies piled up hundreds of miles from the front, while frontline units went hungry. General der Panzertruppe Heinrich von Luttwitz, who would later command 47 Panzer Corps, wrote in July, "The Americans face the same impossibility we faced in Russia. Their mechanical advantage is their weakness. Machines demand fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. They have advanced for 100 miles in 30 days. History teaches us what comes next: paralysis." German intelligence meticulously tracked American consumption. A single Sherman tank guzzled half a mile per gallon on the road, far worse across open fields. An infantry division required 700 tons of supplies daily. An armored division 1,000. Patton commanded 12 divisions advancing on a 60-mile front. The arithmetic was merciless. 12,000 tons of supplies every day, dragged for 100 miles from the Normandy beaches, over cratered roads and through a transportation network that German engineers had systematically demolished in retreat. The conclusion seemed irrefutable. Patton would stop. Generalmajor Siegfried Westphal, soon to be Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt, made his calculation on August 20th. Even if the Americans possessed unlimited trucks, which they did not, and perfect roads, which they did not, and suffered no breakdowns, which was impossible, Patton's advance could not be sustained more than 48 hours. Physical laws cannot be violated, not even by American industry. 5 days later, at 2 p.m. on August 25th, in a requisition chateau near Le Mans, Lieutenant Colonel Loren Ayers of the Motor Transport Service stood before a room of skeptical officers. The arithmetic was undeniable. Patton's Third Army was consuming supplies faster than any force in history, advancing at speeds no logistical system had ever supported. Railheads, scheduled convoys, depot distribution, all had collapsed under the strain. Ayers laid out his solution with blunt clarity. "Gentlemen, we are going to build a one-way highway from Cherbourg and the beaches to the front lines. Every truck will run 20 hours out of 24. No stops except fuel and breakdowns. Minimum 12,500 tons delivered daily. No excuses, no exceptions." The name came from railroading. A Red Ball freight was an express shipment that took precedence over everything else on the line. The Red Ball Express would run on the same principle: absolute priority. The technical specifications shredded every rule of military transport. To parallel one-way routes, one for loaded trucks pushing forward, the other for empties racing back. Convoys running 24 hours a day with headlights blazing, abandoning blackout discipline. A no-stop policy, 5-minute convoy intervals, and an average speed of 35 miles an hour maintained day and night over ruined French roads. Without pause. Mobile maintenance units were stationed every 50 miles. Military police checkpoints pulled any vehicle falling below 25 miles an hour. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher, commanding the advanced section of the communications zone, studied the projected requirements: 140 truck companies, 5,958 vehicles, 90% operational availability. He shook his head. That's impossible. Every logistics textbook says so. Yet within 36 hours, the impossible was running. On August 26, 1944, drivers of the 3,916th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their GMC CCKWS, the legendary 2.5-ton deuce-and-a-half, loaded with 105mm shells, bound for Patton's guns at Melun, 300 miles east. The composition of this force would have confounded every assumption of Nazi racial ideology. Of the 23,000 drivers who kept the Red Ball Express moving, roughly 75% were African American soldiers serving in a segregated army. Men denied equal rights at home were now sustaining the advance of America's most celebrated white generals. Within hours, the drivers created a culture of their own. They painted slogans on truck hoods: Patton's Blood Bank, Hitler, Here We Come, Detroit to Berlin Express. They made their own rules of the road. Slower trucks pulled aside immediately. Breakdowns were shoved into ditches, and any vehicle under 20 miles an hour was treated as a roadblock. By August 28, German reconnaissance units began transmitting bewildered reports from positions overlooking the Red Ball routes. Aufklärungsabteilung 116 radioed, continuous vehicle column, headlights visible for 20 kilometers. No spacing, no blackout discipline. Estimate: 1,000 vehicles per hour for the first time. Wehrmacht officers were forced to consider that the Americans had rewritten the laws of supply with raw willpower, industry, and the drivers of the Red Ball Express. To German eyes, the Red Ball Express looked like madness. Headlights blazing at night invited air attack. Continuous columns presented perfect artillery targets. No vehicle spacing meant a single breakdown could block an entire road. Yet the Americans seemed unconcerned. Generalleutnant Edgar Feuchtner, commander of the 21st Panzer Division, personally observed the convoys from concealed positions on August 30th. His report to Army Group B headquarters reflected a dawning alarm. The enemy operates a supply system beyond our comprehension. Vehicles pass at 30-second intervals, day and night, without pause. They do not hide, do not disperse, do not follow any rules we understand. This is not military science, it is mass production applied to war. What the Germans failed to grasp was that American logistics worked on principles utterly alien to their doctrine. Where German procedure emphasized concealment, Americans relied on sheer volume. Where Germans conserved vehicles, Americans accepted 20% mechanical attrition as normal and factored it in. Where Germans clung to regulations, Americans improvised. The results defied every calculation. First week, August 25th to 31st, 1940, for supplies delivered, 89,939 tons daily average, 12,848 tons round-trip distance, 686 miles vehicle. Strength, 5,958 trucks averaging 1.5 rotations daily. Fuel consumed by the operation itself, 300,000 gallons. Captured American documents with these figures were dismissed by German analysts as propaganda, but they were real and accelerating. By September 5th, the Red Ball Express had established an impossible rhythm. Convoys departed every 5 minutes from the western terminus. The average convoy, 67 trucks. Standard load, 5 tons. Frequent overload, 7 tons. Meanwhile, German supply lines still moved mostly by horse-drawn wagon. The Wehrmacht was watching the future of mechanized war roll past, headlights on, at 30 miles an hour. Do you want me to carry this forward into how the Red Ball Express enabled Patton to keep pushing east, while German commanders kept predicting his imminent paralysis? Here's the natural continuation, showing how Red Ball shattered German expectations and kept Patton rolling. When every German general believed he must stop, by every German calculation, Patton's Third Army should have stalled in late August. Fuel alone should have stopped him cold. Instead, the Red Ball Express turned theory into ash. On September 1st, Patton's tanks crossed the Meuse. By September 8th, they reached the Moselle. Paris had fallen days earlier. The advance showed no sign of slowing. German staff officers were stunned. Their war college mathematics had been overturned not by tactics, but by trucks. Generals who had written confidently of Patton's paralysis within 48 hours now faced an enemy that seemed to defy the laws of supply. The truth was brutally simple. American industry had put wheels under its factories. The deuce-and-a-half carried Detroit's assembly lines directly to the battlefield. What Germany treated as limitation, America treated as engineering problem. And when problems arose, drivers of the Red Ball solved them with wrench, grit, and sheer audacity. By mid-September, the Express was moving 14,000 tons a day, enough to keep 12 divisions advancing across a continent. German armies, bound to railroads and horse wagons, had never imagined such scale. To them, logistics was restraint. To the Americans, logistics was liberation. They burn more gasoline moving gasoline than we allocate to entire panzer divisions. This isn't war as we understand it. It's industrial overflow. The Red Ball Express didn't just supply Pattons. Advance it, multiplied it. German doctrine calculated that an armored division could sustain to 030 miles of advance per day under optimal conditions. Patton's divisions, fed by the Express, averaged 40 to 60 miles daily for weeks. On September 1, 1944, the U.S. 4th Armored Division advanced 35 miles in the morning, paused for resupply at noon. Red Ball trucks were already waiting with fuel and ammunition. By dusk, the division had advanced another 32 miles. A 67-mile single-day advance, more than double the maximum in German planning, shattered assumptions about the pace of mechanized war. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, reviewing reports in East Prussia, initially refused to believe them. No armored force can advance 60 miles daily for a week. Mechanical failures alone prevent it. This is propaganda or misidentification, but intercepted American radio traffic confirmed the pace. More alarming, the Americans broadcast their positions openly, without code, confident they could outmove any German response. By September 5, 1944, German intelligence compiled its first comprehensive report on the Red Ball Express. Its conclusions were catastrophic. Americans wasted vehicles prodigiously, abandoning disabled trucks rather than repairing them. Drivers operated on stimulants and pushed beyond every principle of personnel endurance. No camouflage discipline, headlights on. Convoys packed tight, yet Allied air supremacy meant no attacks came. Mechanical failure rates of 30% daily were simply overwhelmed by redundancy. Fuel consumption on a scale that would bankrupt any European military but was trivial for American industry. The report concluded grimly. American logistical practice cannot be understood within our doctrine. It is not economy. It is excess. They fight war as if their resources are infinite. Against such methods, our calculations are useless. Field Marshal Walter Model's response betrayed a new kind of despair. If these reports are accurate, we face not a superior army but a superior civilization. They make no effort to hide because they do not fear us. They waste resources because they have infinite resources. We cannot defeat this with tactics, but the German observers never saw the cost. Red Ball drivers paid in sweat, blood, and nerves. Many operated trucks for 72 hours straight, sustained by benzodrine, hallucinating from exhaustion. The roads were narrow, cratered, and treacherous. Trucks collided in fog, overturned on sharp turns, or burst into flames when overheated engines caught fire. Over the Express's brief life, at least 300 drivers were killed in accidents. Yet morale held astonishingly high. The men knew the stakes. 3 out of 4 drivers were African American, soldiers serving in a segregated army that denied them basic rights at home. But in France they carried the lifeblood of Patton's army, and in doing so they struck a direct blow against Hitler's racial theories. Every mile driven, every ton delivered, was living proof that diversity was strength. Captured officers confirmed the psychological weight of this system. Oberst Hans von Luck, taken prisoner in September 1944, told his interrogators, "We knew we had lost when we understood your supply system. You violate every rule, waste fuel, abandon vehicles, exhaust drivers, yet succeed through sheer volume. You have industrialized war beyond our comprehension." The psychological effect on the front was immense. German soldiers lay in the dark with 3 rounds per rifle, listening as the rumble of American trucks filled the night, an endless river of engines, gears, and supplies. The sound itself became a form of psychological warfare, a reminder that the Americans could never be starved into stillness. Even the trucks themselves amazed German engineers. The GMC KW2 and a half ton, the Deuce and a half, was mass production distilled into steel. Rugged, simple, endlessly replaceable, it embodied the American way of war, quantity as quality. By war's end, General Motors had produced over 500,000 of the GMC KWS, more trucks than the entire German military fielded of every type combined. Each vehicle embodied innovations the Wehrmacht lacked. All-wheel drive came standard, not as a rare exception. Engines could run on low-grade fuel without modification. Waterproofing allowed 30-inch fording. Tire inflation systems were built in. Even heaters worked reliably in winter. But what most stunned German observers was not the trucks themselves. but the philosophy behind them. Where the Wehrmacht rebuilt engines, the Americans replaced them. Where the Germans rationed spare parts, the Americans threw away entire vehicles for minor problems. Where German armies relied on master mechanics, the U.S. Army trained thousands of competent mechanics who could handle 80% of repairs. Logistics was not about conserving resources, it was about overwhelming problems with volume. As the front surged eastward, the Red Ball Express flexed with a speed that German planners could not comprehend. When the original Cherbourg Chartres route strained under demand, the Americans created entirely new lines almost overnight. The White Ball Express, Rouen to Paris, the Green Diamond, Cherbourg to the railheads, the Red Lion, Bayeux to Brussels, the ABC Line, Antwerp, Brussels, Charleroi. German staff officers needed weeks of planning and approvals for such undertakings. The Americans painted new markers, assigned trucks, and were rolling within 48 hours. For Nazi racial theorists, the predominance of African American drivers was a contradiction too great to process. Hitler's ideology declared black soldiers inferior, incapable of initiative or technical skill. Yet 3/4 of the Red Ball's 23,000 drivers were African American, and they were performing logistical feats the German army could not even imagine. The men knew the irony. They knew what the Nazis thought of them, and what many of their own countrymen still thought of them, and so they drove harder. Every mile proved Hitler wrong. Every load delivered was a blow not just against the Wehrmacht, but against the poisonous idea of racial superiority. They were fighting fascism with truck keys and defeating it through performance. Some German prisoners forced to load Red Ball trucks had their worldview collapse under the weight of reality. They worked alongside African American sergeants who calculated load distributions faster than German engineers, who spoke clearer English than their own instructors, and who treated prisoners with fairness utterly at odds with Nazi propaganda. Every interaction undermined the racial doctrines they had been taught since childhood. The Red Ball Express required infrastructure the Wehrmacht had declared impossible under combat conditions. Yet while convoys roared eastward, American engineers were simultaneously building and rebuilding the roads they traveled. They reinforced 40 bridges, created 15 major fuel depots, established 26 maintenance stations, and threw up 8 temporary cities to house drivers all while the operation was running at full tempo. The bridge at Montes, demolished by German engineers to halt American logistics, was calculated by Wehrmacht staff to require 6 weeks of reconstruction. American engineers replaced it with a temporary span in 14 hours. Red Ball convoys were delayed only briefly, rerouted 8 miles along bulldozed bypasses cut in a single night. German observers were dumbfounded. There were no elaborate planning conferences, no blueprints in triplicate. The Americans simply built faster than the Germans could destroy. Infrastructure seemed to appear overnight in French fields. One achievement particularly shattered German assumptions: American ammunition supply rates. German artillery officers had theoretical models for what a modern industrial army might sustain. The Red Ball Express exceeded them. During the reduction of Metz's fortifications in September 1944, the 20th Corps' artillery fired 100,000 rounds in 24 hours. The Red Ball delivered every shell plus a 20% surplus. German batteries defending Metz, meanwhile, were rationed to 50 rounds per gun per day. The disparity was crushing. American guns thundered without pause for hours, while German officers scribbled calculations showing that such bombardments required 50 truckloads of shells every hour, an output they had considered impossible in any army. Yet the trucks kept coming. The Red Ball Express thundered on without pause. Vehicles burned out at rates that would have paralyzed any other army. By late September, mechanical attrition was staggering. Average vehicle life barely 10,000 miles, far below the normal 30,000. Daily breakdowns consumed 30% of all trucks. Engines were replaced 500 per week. Tires, 10,000 weekly. Over 5,000 vehicles were destroyed or abandoned. Yet the operation never slowed. American production had anticipated such losses. Ships arrived weekly at French ports carrying hundreds of new trucks. Replacement drivers trained into days were immediately thrown into convoys. German calculations confirmed the absurdity. Americans were destroying more trucks each week than the Wehrmacht possessed in France. Yet total transport capacity increased rather than decreased. They had achieved what Germans considered impossible: logistics faster than consumption. French civilians along the Red Ball routes witnessed abundance that contradicted years of Nazi-imposed scarcity. Drivers, particularly African American soldiers, often shared rations with children and locals, giving away chocolate, cigarettes, and soap despite regulations. German intelligence noted the impact. The French increasingly believed American victory was inevitable. a morale shift that undercut German authority and bolstered resistance sentiment. The Red Ball Express continued to astonish, demonstrating not just resilience but a capacity for rapid systemic adaptation that German observers could neither anticipate nor comprehend. The strain of the extended supply lines in early September 1940 seemed poised to break the operation. Convoy intervals lengthened from 5 to 15 minutes, vehicle speed slowed, and drivers were collapsing under exhaustion. German intelligence, sensing opportunity, reported American supply lines show signs of collapse. Convoy intervals have increased. Vehicle speed has decreased. This is our chance. General der Panzertrupp Manual, September 8, 1940 for yet. Within 72 hours, the Red Ball Express reorganized with astonishing efficiency. Intermediate transfer points were established, cutting individual runs to 350 miles. Driver rotations were implemented, forward maintenance bases created, and the total number of assigned vehicles doubled. By September 12th, tonnage delivery not only recovered but exceeded previous levels. What should have been a collapse instead strengthened the system, complementing ground logistics. Americans launched a massive aerial supply effort, previously considered impossible by German doctrine. C-47 transport aircraft began delivering critical supplies directly to forward units, each carrying 3 tons. On September 16th, Wehrmacht observers recorded 900 transport flights in a single day, delivering 2,700 tons of material, nearly 10 times the Luftwaffe's maximum daily supply to Stalingrad. German intelligence and commanders could only watch in disbelief as American logistics reshaped the battlefield in real time. This episode underscored a fundamental lesson the Wehrmacht could not grasp. Industrial-scale logistics, combined with adaptability and human initiative, could render traditional military calculations obsolete. By October 1944, the Red Ball Express had rewritten the rules of operational logistics. German officers, accustomed to decades of European warfare doctrine, could scarcely comprehend the scale, speed, and adaptability of the American system. The numbers alone were staggering. Duration: 82 days of continuous operation. Tonnage delivered: 412,193 tons of supply miles, 222 million vehicles employed, average 5,958, peak 7,000 drivers, 23,000. Total fuel consumption, 700,000. GALLONS daily ammunition delivered to Patton alone, 40,000 tons. Rations transported, 15 million. Medical supplies, 135,000 tons. German officers admitted later that they had analyzed the operation using their own European war experience, multiplying their best logistics performance by 3 to estimate American capacity. Yet even this gross underestimation fell far short of reality. The operation revealed principles that baffled German military theory. Decentralized command: sergeants and junior officers made operational decisions that, in the Wehrmacht, would have required colonels or generals. Chaos was expected but never occurred. Overwhelming redundancy: American planners assumed losses of vehicles, drivers, and fuel but overwhelmed them with sheer volume. Mechanical attrition, accidents, and exhaustion were planned for and absorbed seamlessly. Industrial integration: trucks, maintenance units, and even railroad repair crews function in continuous feedback loops. Railheads were reconstructed faster than German forces could destroy them, often using captured German equipment. Scale as strategy: German doctrine emphasized precision, economy, and conservation. Americans operated under the principle of volume and velocity, transforming logistics into a weapon itself. Field Marshal Walter Model summarized the Wehrmacht's realization in his final report: "We were not defeated by American tanks or planes primarily. We were defeated by American trucks." The Red Ball Express was more than a supply operation. It was a demonstration of industrial and organizational ingenuity, a logistical triumph that shattered preconceptions of military possibility. The Germans had faced the impossible, yet it operated in plain sight, turning conventional expectations of warfare upside down. Exactly what the Red Ball Express demonstrated was not merely the movement of supplies but the operationalization of industrial and human potential on a scale Germans had neither imagined nor experienced. The operation shattered every preconception the Wehrmacht held about warfare, logistics, and even racial hierarchy. Several profound lessons emerged: psychological impact: German soldiers and officers, trained to view American forces as mechanically dependent and racially inferior, were confronted with undeniable evidence to the contrary. The relentless flow of trucks, engines, and fuel made abstract concepts like industrial superiority and national will tangible in the field. Faith in German invincibility eroded. leaving officers demoralized before even engaging American combat forces. Racial reckoning. African American soldiers, previously confined to menial or segregated roles, were the backbone of a decisive military operation. Their performance, precision, endurance, and sheer efficiency forced American generals to recognize their full capabilities. Eisenhower's observation at Red Ball operations was emblematic. These men were winning the war without traditional combat, proving that systemic prejudice, when removed, allowed talent to flourish. The operation became a quiet catalyst for the later desegregation of the U.S. Armed Forces. Logistics as strategy. Red Ball demonstrated that logistics was not a supporting function, but a primary determinant of operational success. The combination of speed, redundancy, and improvisation allowed Patton's forces to operate beyond German expectations, often outpacing tactical doctrine. Volume, flexibility, and adaptability became as important as firepower or armored strength. Asterisk industrial-military integration. The Red Ball Express fused American industrial capacity with operational ingenuity. Trucks, rail, fuel, maintenance units, and personnel formed an integrated system operating continuously, with human and material resources optimized to levels Germans had never considered achievable. Efficiency was achieved through scale, repetition, and decentralized initiative, rather than rigid adherence to doctrine. Global military influence. Post-war, German and Allied military analysts studied the Red Ball Express to rethink logistics theory. Principles such as redundancy planning, decentralized decision-making, and rapid infrastructure adaptation became central to modern military operations worldwide. In essence, the Red Ball Express was a war-winning system that functioned as both a physical and psychological weapon. Its impact was felt not just on supply lines, but in the minds of soldiers and commanders alike. German observers had expected to outthink and outfight Americans. Instead, they were outsupplied, outorganized, and forced to confront a civilization operating at a scale and efficiency beyond their ideology or imagination. Exactly. The Germans' failure wasn't just technical, it was systemic and cultural. Operation Greif exposed the limits of German military thought. When confronted with an entirely different operational philosophy, redundancy as resilience, Americans anticipated failures. Trucks would break, engines overheat, tires blow, drivers collapse. Instead of halting operations, they simply replaced the vehicle or rotated the driver. Germans, lacking industrial surplus and a culture of immediate replacement, saw every mechanical failure as a critical vulnerability. Decentralized execution. Authority was distributed. Sergeants could make decisions impacting entire convoys. Junior officers adjusted routes in real time. Germans expected rigid hierarchy, centralized planning, and strict adherence to doctrine. The flexibility of American command allowed adaptation on the fly, something the Wehrmacht structure could not replicate. Standardization and specialization. Trucks, spare parts, and operational procedures were standardized. Every driver and mechanic knew their role and could immediately substitute for anyone else. This multiplied operational capability exponentially. Whereas German improvisation slowed because each vehicle or repair required unique solutions. Asterisk human endurance and morale. Americans pushed individuals to extreme limits, but motivation and purpose sustained them. Drivers understood the strategic value of their work. German forces, accustomed to obedience rather than initiative, couldn't match this combination of endurance and self-directed effort. Cultural mindset of resource abundance. American forces assumed losses and planned accordingly. For Germans, scarcity dictated caution. Captured trucks that would have been immediately used as replacements in the U.S. were deadlined in days by German teams. The cultural assumption of enough to replace failures was as critical as the trucks themselves. Operation Greif's immediate collapse demonstrated a stark lesson. Duplicating the tools alone isn't enough. Logistics is as much a philosophy as a system. Without the culture, industrial depth, and decentralized ingenuity that Americans embedded into Red Ball, the Germans could not hope to match even the raw output, let alone the speed and reliability of U.S. operations. Exactly. The Red Ball Express wasn't just a supply operation, it was a redefinition of what military logistics could achieve. From the German perspective, it violated every principle of warfare they had internalized. Weather resilience. German doctrine assumed wheeled logistics froze in winter. Americans improvised in real-time chains, alcohol in radiators. Shifts rotated constantly and kept supplies flowing despite blizzards and ice. Temporary infrastructure supremacy. Unlike the Germans, who built permanent fortifications and depots, Americans created temporary systems that worked immediately. Bridges, roads, maintenance stations, and depots were built, used, and abandoned as needed, giving them speed and adaptability the Germans could never match. Industrial excess as a strategic tool. German planners equated scarcity with discipline and efficiency. Americans treated abundance as operational freedom. Vehicles, fuel, and human labor were disposable in the pursuit of uninterrupted supply. To German observers, it seemed irrational. In reality, it was strategic genius. Operational psychology. German forces could hear the constant rumble of trucks, see the endless convoys, and watch their own assumptions about warfare crumble. The Red Ball Express imposed psychological pressure, demonstrating not just American capability, but American determination and adaptability. Cost perception. $100 million in 1944 to keep Patton supplied was incomprehensible to Germans, who equated cost with scarcity. Americans calculated cost in terms of results, speed, tonnage, and operational success. This fundamental difference in approach made German attempts to emulate it, like Operation Greif, impossible. The Red Ball Express was not just a logistical victory. It was a lesson in the integration of industrial capacity, human adaptability, and operational philosophy, showing that the outcome of war could hinge as much on supply as on combat. Exactly. From the German perspective, the Red Ball Express was almost supernatural, not just a supply line, but a force multiplier and psychological weapon. Every metric tonnage, speed, vehicle replacement, driver endurance defied all assumptions of European military science. But beyond numbers, it was human behavior amplified by organization and opportunity that Germans couldn't reconcile. Voluntary endurance. Drivers worked grueling hours because they believed in the mission, not out of coercion. Germans had never encountered such self-motivated operational effort at scale. Redundancy and adaptability. Germans assumed a destroyed truck or breakdown would halt the line. Americans replaced vehicles, rerouted convoys, improvised repairs, and kept the flow constant. This created the impression of invincibility. Youth and diversity. African American soldiers and teenagers were integral to success, shattering German racial and age-based assumptions about capability. Psychological impact. German troops and officers repeatedly reported the endless stream of trucks, convoys, seemingly without origin or end. Hearing them at night, knowing supplies would reach the front no matter what, destroyed the traditional German fear-based discipline model and sowed a sense of inevitability. About American victory. In short, the Red Ball Express made logistics itself into a weapon. Numbers mattered, but so did human initiative, ingenuity, and morale, forces Germans have failed to anticipate. It wasn't just that Americans could supply their armies. It was that they could do so faster, better, and more resiliently than Germans could comprehend, turning industrial abundance and human effort into a strategic advantage. Exactly this captures the strategic genius of American logistics during WWII. The Red Ball Express was more than a supply line. It was a demonstration of industrial and organizational supremacy that the Germans could neither comprehend nor counter. Several key takeaways emerge. Psychological impact. German forces were demoralized, not just by American firepower, but by the inexhaustible supply that made their defenses futile. Hearing phantom convoys confirmed to them that they were facing an enemy whose resources were limitless. Volume and speed over efficiency. Germans expected careful rationing and hierarchical control, but Americans prioritized throughput and redundancy, accepting waste because speed and reliability were paramount. Decentralized initiative. Junior personnel, drivers, mechanics, and sergeants made rapid, autonomous decisions, which accelerated operations beyond the German capacity for reaction. Integration of society into war effort. The operation showed that an entire civilian industrial apparatus could be temporarily militarized to support frontline operations, dissolving seamlessly after its mission was complete. Irreversibility and surprise. Unlike Germans, Americans could create, operate, and dismantle enormous logistical systems in days, keeping their enemies perpetually off balance. In essence, the Red Ball Express turned logistics itself into a weapon, simultaneously enabling rapid advances, sustaining combat operations far beyond expected limits, and psychologically overwhelming German forces. German commanders didn't just lose battles, they lost faith in their ability to calculate, plan, or resist, which is exactly why so many cited the trucks themselves as decisive. Exactly, the Red Ball Express is a masterclass in industrialized warfare, a turning point where logistics became a decisive weapon rather than mere support. Several profound lessons emerge from this operation. Industrial capacity as a strategic weapon. The Red Ball Express proved that winning wars wasn't just about soldiers or tanks. It was about the ability to produce, transport, and sustain forces faster than the enemy could disrupt. German generals had underestimated not the skill of American soldiers but the scale and adaptability of American production and transportation systems. human determination amplified by organization. While numbers and vehicles mattered, the operation depended on 23,000 drivers operating continuously, often in extreme conditions, showing that human endurance and initiative can amplify industrial capability. Decentralization and flexibility. American logistics ignored rigid hierarchy, allowing junior leaders and enlisted men to make autonomous decisions, enabling a level of speed and problem-solving German doctrine couldn't imagine. Psychological and cultural impact for Germans. Seeing African-American soldiers running the operation shattered racial ideology and morale simultaneously. For Allied society, the Red Ball Express highlighted the power of industrial democracy, where diversity and collective effort turned production into victory. Speed and redundancy over efficiency. The Americans embraced redundancy and waste, recognizing that overproduction and overcapacity could absorb attrition and accelerate results, a concept entirely foreign to German logistical thinking. Permanent strategic lesson. The Red Ball Express taught that logistics is not just support, it is strategy itself. Future military planners worldwide studied it to understand that control of supply can determine victory before combat even begins. In short, the Red Ball Express wasn't just a supply line, it was a living demonstration of industrialized democracy in motion, a logistical weapon that dismantled German calculations and shortened the war. The story of those 6,000 trucks and 23,000 drivers remains one of the most decisive, yet often overlooked, chapters of WWII. Exactly. The Red Ball Express crystallizes a profound truth. Victory in modern warfare isn't determined solely by firepower or tactics, but by the ability to sustain and project combat power through logistics. A few key takeaways from this operation stand out. Industrial democracy versus totalitarian efficiency. Germans assumed centralized control and strict hierarchy were inherently superior. The Red Ball Express proved that flexible, decentralized execution combined with abundant resources could outperform rigid command structures. Human initiative matters. The drivers weren't just following orders, they made decisions, adapted on the fly, and solved problems independently. A level of initiative the Wehrmacht couldn't comprehend or replicate. Abundance is a weapon. German calculations assumed scarcity was inevitable. The Americans showed that overproduction, redundancy, and willingness to accept losses created a logistical force no enemy could counter. Psychological impact. German forces were demoralized, not just by American arms but by the sheer visibility of unstoppable supply. Witnessing trucks, drivers, and material flow in defiance of all prior military theory. Recognition of overlooked contributors. Patton's acknowledgement highlights that logistics personnel, often invisible in historical accounts, can determine the outcome of wars, especially when their efforts are amplified by technology and industrial capacity. In short, the Red Ball Express wasn't just a supply route, it was a strategic weapon, powered by industrial capacity, human endurance, and decentralized initiative. The Germans learned too late that trucks could defeat tanks, and abundance could overwhelm expertise. Exactly. The Red Ball Express was a masterclass in turning industrial capacity, human initiative, and organizational improvisation into a decisive strategic weapon. Every element, the trucks, the drivers, the mechanics, the engineers, the planners, combined into a single unstoppable force that redefined warfare. A few points crystallize its significance. Volume over elegance. The Red Ball Express wasn't efficient by conventional military standards. It was messy, chaotic, and wasteful, but that very redundancy made it resilient and unstoppable. Decentralized execution. German doctrine relied on rigid hierarchy. Americans empowered soldiers at every level to make decisions independently, vastly increasing speed and adaptability. Industrial military synergy. Willow Run bombers and mass-produced trucks weren't just tools. They were force multipliers, enabling armies to move farther, faster, and with far more firepower than Germans expected. Psychological impact. German officers were stunned by the sheer scale and audacity. Supply became a weapon of demoralization as well as of logistics. Legacy. Modern militaries now treat logistics as central to strategy, not just support, thanks to lessons learned from operations like the Red Ball Express. In short, the Red Ball Express transformed trucks, supply depots, and roads into weapons of war, proving that in an industrialized conflict, production and logistics can defeat even the most formidable army.